the Baen Free Radio Hour.
Welcome to the Baen Free Radio Hour. It's a pleasure to have you along. I am Baen Associate Editor and your podcast host, David Afsharirad. This week, we bring you DJ Butler's interview with Tim Akers about Akers' latest novel for Baen, Wraithbound. Readers may know Akers from the two Night Watch novel he's written for Baen, which can best be described as Men in Black at the Ren Fair. Well, Wraithbound is an altogether different animal, a dark, epic fantasy with serious stakes. Still, we're sure fans of the Night Watch series will find much to like, and for those unfamiliar with Akers' work, we're excited to present this new voice in fantasy. But first, the news. It's almost May, and that means that the mass markets have hit bookstore shelves. Let's take a look. First up is Aurora Borealis Bridge by Jane Lynskold. Summoned to Overwhere, Peg, Meg, and Teg, along with the Inquisitors Zirak, Grunwald, and Varys, will uncover the startling truth about what lies on the other side of the Aurora Borealis Bridge, a truth that holds the secret of Overwhere, and that will change all their lives forever. Next up, we have A New Clan by David Weber and Jane Lynskold. Freshly home from an internship on Manticore, teenage Stephanie Harrington is up to her eyebrows in trouble. In trying to get enough proof to get the understaffed authorities of her pioneer planet to act, Stephanie will be called upon to attempt things she never imagined doing. And The Jigsaw Assassin by Catherine Acero. When a serial killer plot points to the Royalist political party, Major Bajan must return to the capital city, and there she must face her most deadly foe yet, interstellar politics. That's Aurora Borealis Bridge by Jane Lynskold, A New Clan by David Weber and Jane Lynskold, and The Jigsaw Assassin by Catherine Acero, all available now in mass market paperback. And that's it for the news.
Hello, this is DJ Dave Butler. I'm here with Tim Akers to talk about his exciting new novel, Wraithbound. It's out now in trade paper and all your favorite ebook formats, DRM free when you buy them at Baen.com, of course. Tim was born in deeply rural North Carolina, the only son of a theologian. He moved to Chicago for college, where he lives with his wife. He splits his time between databases, fountain pens, and fortunately for us, writing fantasy novels. Maybe he writes them all with fountain pens. I'll have to ask him that. No, okay, very good. And that's like a Christopher Paolini and Neil Gaiman kind of trick. Wraithbound is his ninth novel. It is the first in a very exciting Sanderson-esque epic fantasy series published by Baen. Tim, welcome.
Howdy.
So, what is it you're writing with these fountain pens if it's not your novels then?
I actually did write my first two books by hand, longhand, which was it's not a good idea. I do most of my brainstorming by hand. My brain works differently when I'm writing things out by hands, and it helps me. I'm a little better able to be creative when I'm doing that. So I have notebook after notebook of just me talking myself through cosmology and plotting. And whenever I run into a problem, I'll stop, the typing portion of my writing, and I'll go back and pull out a notebook and just sit and brainstorm my way through the issue. So it's equal parts therapy and creative storytelling. So
do you feel like the different tactile experience changes the way you think, like you access more brainstormy parts of your psyche by doing that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely the mechanical action of writing longhand and being physically involved with the words changes the way my brain fires. I can feel it. So yeah, there's definitely a difference there.
Yeah, that's interesting. I am embarrassingly forgetting the name of the book right now. David Afsharad recommended a book to me, and I read it kind of late last year, which is a history of word processing, which had a lot of sort of vignette style history. Baen came up, actually. Jerry Pournelle, kind of about a page and a half about Jerry. But one of the sort of themes of the book is this question, this argument, whether, I know we weren't planning on having this discussion, we were talking about Wraithbound, but whether it's really even the same activity when you change the tool that much, right? So, does writing with a word processor, it gives you so much fluidity to be able to go back and instantly change something, right? Or step beyond word processors to something like Scrivener, where you can systematically change the order of things by, checking something in the menu, right? Like, is that maybe on some level not even the same process?
Yeah, it definitely changes the way that you do the process. I'm old enough that I didn't start with normal word processors. I started in DOS, and not even DOS, actually, it was BASIC. And so there's definitely been a change in the way that we're able to approach the writing process. And for me, Scrivener is a line too far. I really feel that you begin to lose something about the effort or the labor of writing when you can switch things around so easily. Most of the folks that I'm no offense to Scrivener folks, but most of the folks that I know who do Scrivener, they spend way too much time fiddling and not enough time writing. And I think that's one of the nice things about longhand is that you really there's so much labor involved with it. You don't go back and fix things, you just plow forward. And I said I wrote my first 2 books that way. I considered that physical draft as a zero draft, right? And it then became draft 1 through the process of just typing it out. But that was back when I was writing, 80,000 word new weird things, and I had a day job. So I could easily take the notebook with me to work and between tasks, dash off some pages and so forth. So I think it definitely changes. I'd buy into that personally. Technology always changes the way that you approach art. There's a great short story, and again, I'm going to forget the name of it, but by William Gibson, that is about dream manipulation. There's this machine that gets built, and there are artists who become famous because they record their dreams and then sort of mix them like you would a mixtape or a soundboard. And there's a line from that, wondering how many greats of this art form have lived and died having never discovered it because the machine didn't exist yet. And it's really this sort of, Gibson always does things kind of at another level, but this meditation on the nature of art and whether, all these artists died before the written word could be discovered. That, I come from a part of the South where verbal and visual and sort of storytelling, standing up and talking in front of a crowd, is a recognized art form. And that is a different art form than what I do. But they really have the same kind of background. So the technology definitely changes the nature of storytelling. We're storytellers, but how we do it is different.
Yeah, that's interesting. And the flip side of the question, right? That's such an interesting, provocative question. But the flip side is, how many epic poets have lived and died driving a bus or whatever because that form is gone, and they might have been, they're a garrulous bus driver or a shop floor foreman or something, when they might have once been the guy that stood up and laid out, dactylic hexameters and epic epithets for, hours of entertainment for the tribe.
Right. Yeah. And the nature, the market for it doesn't exist anymore. So
right.
They might have been geniuses at one point. And the way that bookstores are going, I kind of wonder how many of us are left. So
coming back. Yeah, no, I think the next generation is going to write in pure emoji speak. So I train yourself for that, Tim. That's the transition. All right. Well, this is a little bonus chat. So let's talk about Wraithbound. This is a scary, excellent, beautiful, but also sort of daunting, daunting cover. It implies a world that's got some real monsters in it. Tell us about the setting, if you would.
Sure. So the magic systems, I'm a cosmology guy, right? I start all of my projects by sitting down and figuring out the cosmology of the world. And then I go from there to figure out, religious systems and cultural histories. And then I begin to see plots sort of accrete around those points of tension. And then I work down the character, and then I work my way back up to the actual story. So anyway, the cosmology of the world comes from the magic system, and the magic system is this. There are 8 planes of reality. There's the material plane, which is the 9th realm, and then there's the 4 elemental planes, and then I call them the 4 arcane planes. It's not a very good word, but it's the one I use, which are life, death, order, and chaos. And each of these planes has I want to be clear. I'm only telling you the part that the actual characters understand, because there's a lot in the world that is not revealed in Wraithbound. But the basic idea is each of these planes have denizens that are native to those planes. For the elemental planes, that's pretty obvious. The elementals. For life and death, those are the fae or fairies, and wraiths. And the fae are every living thing that has not yet been born into the material world, and wraiths are everything that has died in the material plane. So those populations are changing. Like eventually you're going to run out of life and fill up the world of the dead. But the world of order and chaos, those are angels and demons, and as we understand them, creatures of order and creatures of chaos. And like the creature on the front there, that's obviously a demon. But I want to be clear, like not all chaos is bad necessarily.
Not morally evil.
Yeah, they're not morally evil. They're just chaos. Most nature spirits are creatures of what we would consider nature spirits, are creatures of chaos, as well as life. There's alliances there. Creatures of order are, angels who want to impose order, but order has its limits. There's stagnation there. There's danger there. So again, not necessarily morally good, but that's kind of the line that we bring to it. There's a lot of how we think of these things as imposing on the story. So there are these creatures. The mages, the magic users of the world, are called spirit binders, and what they do is they fray the edge of their soul, and they weave it into the edge of a spirit of one of those realms and bind them together. And there are various levels of spirits. There's tiny ones, there are motes, and there's more powerful ones. Because that sort of primes that are more and more powerful and less able to be controlled. So you are then able, as a spirit binder, to either pull that spirit into the material world or use it as an anchor to pull yourself into that plane. And there are a lot of implications to that. So that's the basis of the magic system. The setting for the world implies that the apocalypse has kind of already occurred. The war between order and chaos has happened kind of at a level higher than we're aware of, and chaos essentially won. And so there are all of these. There's an area of order. There's a city called Fulcrum in the middle of the world, and it emanates order magic in order to preserve the world. And there is a bubble of chaos that exists beyond that. that is very slowly eating away at that bubble of order, and things are beginning to wear away and collapse. So that's sort of the setting. Our main character is way off on the edge near the order wall, it's called, and they're actually in an area that is isolated from the main part of order, because it's kind of like a radio broadcast, this thing from Fulcrum, this order magic that comes out, and it goes to what are called bastions, which then emanate their own bubble of order magic. And so if you were to see a map, it would look like almost like a Mandelbrot set. All of these overlapping circles. And this particular circle where he lives, where it's called Hammerwall is the place, has become isolated from the rest of the world. You can get there via airship, via Zeppelin, essentially. But the way that the land bridge has been cut.
Mm-hmm. So it's fantastic the way, on the one hand, you've got a sort of an a priori invented sort of Aristotelian feeling, kind of from a priori categories, building up a cosmology, but you arrive at some old ideas, right? I mean, the idea of an umbilicus mundi, right? There's a world navel that's holding the world together.
Yeah.
So if you get in an airship, by the way, airships kind of pushes us to another little observation, right? What kind of fantasy is this? Like, what sorts of things does one see on the ground as one is moving around?
I consider this to be a flintlock fantasy. It's pretty heavily influenced. Someone asked me today, what are the comps for this? And I said, this is Brandon Sanderson crossed with Final Fantasy. There's very heavy influence from that kind of, there's technology around, but magic is so prominent that a lot of technologies don't get bothered with. But there are muskets, and I imagine a lot of the clothing as being more like 18th century as opposed to traditional medieval fantasy robes and cloaks and all that. So yeah, it's, there are carriages, but there are also clockwork people, but there are also these giant airships that operate on antiballast and binding zephyrs, which are aerial elementals, woven them into the fabric of the ship itself, that allows them to fly. So yeah, there's, think of it as kind of like 18th century, maybe early 19th century technology, but also fantasy, because there are swords play a big part of it. And the magic system is so dominant that infantry are powerful. You get musket lines and all that, and cannon, but it's also possible to command lightning and cloak yourself into a giant earth elemental and just batter your way through a pike line. So it's a combination of those two.
Yeah. It's a lot of fun. So if you are in one of these airships and you're flying from Hammerwall to some other space, and you look down, like you're seeing land, but it's been taken over. It's completely subject to the rule of chaos. There's no law in it. What do you see? Do you see anything?
Well, so that depends on where you are. But it's this sort of cancerous growth, honestly. It's nature, but it is out of control. I think of it as, kudzu patches and just massive forests that don't really grow in the way that forests are supposed to grow. And again, there's a fair amount of Final Fantasy influence there. These kind of living lands that are slowly being taken over by chaos. Now, the stories about what lies beyond the Order Wall are a little more extreme, because to them it's physical hell. It's run by demons, and I don't want to spoil the story, but there are expectations for what you're going to find in the wild that are different than what they actually experience. Someone who actually walks through those territories expects to die immediately, but not necessarily. Entropy is very high. Things fall apart. You go in expecting. One of the very first things that happens in the book is the main character is chopping the wood for the night, and the axe falls apart because they're so close to chaos. And they sort of expected the axe to last longer than it did, but things erode so quickly under the influence of chaos. Things fall apart. So
yeah. Which is interesting because notwithstanding that, when Fulcrum and Fulcrum's agents appear, it's not necessarily shining paladins who are greeted with rejoicing that these are the people who are here to save us, right? It's just to your earlier point, I guess, it's not white hats and black hats, chaos and law are not evil and good.
Yeah, and part of that has to do with the main character's relationship to the central power. They're in hiding because the main character's name is Rae, and his dad was a stormbinder for a local baron, and that baron was involved in a demonic cabal, and he didn't know that. And they are forced to flee, and so you're unsure whether or not the cops are good guys or not. And if you find out sort of as experientially, the reader does, who they can trust and who they can't trust. So yeah, it's definitely not like there are heroes, yay, they're superheroes that are here to save us. It's really more like you don't want to draw their attention. And if you have, then you've done something wrong, or you've gotten involved with someone that you shouldn't have. So
yeah, that's interesting. So do you feel like so the idea of the sort of tension between law and chaos has been a big one for Michael Moorcock, right? From way back.
Yep.
Do you feel like you're at all in dialogue with that? Like, do you feel like you're sort of working with a similar idea where, I think Fulcrum is an interesting title, right? Fulcrum is like the point of a balance.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you're working in a similar space, or that you're answering Moorcock, or is this sort of just a smaller piece of your larger cosmology?
This is just a smaller piece of my larger cosmology. There's no question Moorcock is involved, but I think in the sense that he's an influence of mine. And you don't deny your influences. You don't just say, oh no, I absolutely, this is entirely original. I'm not insane. But there's definitely, honestly, like the Order Chaos thing, I draw more from Warhammer Fantasy Battle, or the Warhammer Roleplay universe, than Moorcock directly. But they draw their influence from Moorcock, unquestionably.
Sure.
So my understanding of it definitely comes from that sense. But it's definitely not really, I'm not intentionally engaging Moorcock's cosmology when I do this.
Right.
I just built the magic system, and then a history of the cosmology, and the Order Chaos stuff sort of derived from that. So yeah.
Interesting. So a question about spirit binders for you. So, and we need to get into like the story here, but this maybe is a segue into the story. So not everyone's a spirit binder. How do you determine that you're a spirit binder? Is this like an innate inborn quality? Are some stronger than others? How does our protagonist with the disintegrating axe find out that he's a spirit binder?
It is a learned skill. So just like any other, this is a world where the magic is something that you have to study and learn. And the city of Fulcrum is built around the only recognized college of magic, which is called the Iron College. And so there's supposed to be, I don't say a certification process, but you're definitely allowed or not allowed to be a spirit binder. And so you're not you're supposed to be trained in it. And if you're not, then that's one of the things that justicars come after, because there are risks involved. If you're doing it in a way that is not acceptable, you could potentially open a door into chaos and things can get bad. And not just chaos, but also order. It's all about balance, right? So if you are an unlicensed flame binder, there are implications to being able to draw into, actual inferno that has some risks. So yeah, it's a learned process. Because his father was a spirit binder and is trying to hide that fact now, trying to hide his history and who he is. Rae has access to, he was originally he was raised in a noble tradition of learning spirit binding. His destiny was supposed to be a spirit binder, even a storm binder. He was supposed to take his dad's position. And he began the early classes in that and then had to flee and had to stop his education, but it's still his passion. And so he begins to train himself, which is extremely dangerous and goes terribly wrong. If it didn't go terribly wrong, there wouldn't be a story, right? There wouldn't be interesting things happening. But yeah, he starts by training himself. His father strictly forbids it. His family is always worried about him, learning these things and still showing interest and stuff. But they don't stop him. So yeah, it's a learned skill.
Yeah. So in theory, someone might have more or less talent, but anybody could learn it.
Yeah, it's like a piano.
Like a piano. Yeah. So, okay. So, by the way, we do see this, there's a prologue. We get the opening. We don't see the full ramifications of it, right, in good prologue style, but we see the beginning of the story. Our entry point is the flight of Rae's family when he's a child, and then we cut to them living in Stormwall. Tell us more about Rae. One of the things that I think is interesting to me is the book. Do you agree with me that sort of epic fantasy is sort of the big category of the book? Is that?
Yeah, that was the goal. It's intentionally epic.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that's interesting to me is that epic fantasy often is very sincere and sort of solemn, and your protagonist is carries a little bit different flavor. He's sometimes a little snarky, he can be like a little mouthy, or Mm-hmm. Tell us about Rae and why should we like him?
Oh, you shouldn't know he's a jerk. No, he's a good guy. Rae is a very sincere in the sense that he's doing what he's doing to try to help his family. That is his central motivation. But also, he's trying to do it to help himself, because he has this idea of what his life should be and what his family's life should be and what sort of honors his father should have in society. And instead he's working a farm out in the middle of nowhere, and he doesn't like that. And so he'll kind of do anything to get his family back to that stage, even if it's illegal. So he's, like you say, a kind of snarky dude, kind of a, I don't want to say miscreant, but certainly willing to bend the law if it suits his purpose. Law in the capital L sense, because that's the kind of world that we live in here. But his family means a lot to him. His sister is one of the main characters in the book, and he kind of starts off in not I'll say an antagonistic relationship with his sister, but certainly pointed relationship with his sister, and the development between the two of them over time is, I think, one of the more interesting things about him. So yeah, it's Rae's story, but really it's both of their stories. It's kind of the family story.
Yeah. I want to hear that, but first let me just push a little further on this question. So, I mean, it feels like, I guess I'll offer an observation. You can respond to it or not, but maybe to some extent his sort of snarkiness is a response to the tension he feels between what he thinks ought to be and what actually is, right? Like he needs some kind of irony as almost like an immune system response to my parents were good people, my father's supposed to be this important spirit binder, and we're in basically this isolated in the sticks, and maybe that's why we have this kind of
yeah, there's definitely it's tricky because he's a sarcastic character, but you don't want to take that so far that it becomes unlikable. I mean,
yeah.
he is in some
Like he
ways
doesn't believe in value, right? Like he's not just a nihilist.
right. Yeah, exactly. It's a dark book, but it's not a grim dark book, because I want you to actually like the characters and care about what happens to them, and that's not really how grim dark usually functions. It's he is having a kind of a crisis, and the way that he deals with that crisis is through humor in a lot of cases, and kind of this cynical, sarcastic response. But he's not bitter.
Yeah.
He's on. There are versions of him that could become bitter with time, and he's sort of valiantly striving against that. And his sister especially is trying to drag him back from that in her own way, in her own earnest sort of response. She sees him doing things that she knows will disappoint their parents, and is trying to drag him back from that thing. But in his mind, he's doing these things for their parents, for the family, and is trying to, maybe he's making a mistake in doing that, but sometimes we have to make our own mistakes.
Yeah. So tell us more about the sister then, and about, kind of the general, the tension between them, and a little, I mean, you touched on that some, but maybe a little more, and kind of the direction that goes.
Yeah. So the sister's name is ridiculous. It's La, or Lalette. And so La sees herself as her brother's guardian in a lot of ways, because she sees him making mistakes, and it's like, if someone doesn't step in, you're going to really screw up and sort of ruin your life and ruin our lives, and get us in trouble. She's just as discontent as him in the situation, but has decided to make the best of it, as opposed to I'm going to break everything and pick up the pieces and find my way out. She's certainly a more loving character than Rae, as far as taking care of people is concerned, and sees herself kind of as not only Rae's guardian, but like the person who's keeping the family together in a lot of ways. And so La is she's a mechanical genius. Like, she's the one who's doing all the dumb hard work around the farm. Rae lets his cynicism get to him, and is sort of like, I just chores, and I want to get them done and get out of here. Whereas La is very much committed on like getting the family's farm and succeeding, and getting them through the winter, and the realities of, she's more of a reality based person. Like, they're both problem solvers, and they're really solving the same problems. They just approach them in different ways. He's much more of an idealist than she is. She's more of the realist, the practical, solution person, which, when they're presented with the same problems, the way that they approach them differently is kind of part of what makes their interaction interesting. And they begin to face really large problems, and resolve them in different ways. So I see a lot of La, especially once we get around to book 2. I have a path for her that I'm interested in exploring. So
yeah, very exciting. Now there's a third. I think there are more than 3 sort of central characters, but there's a third sort of most central character, I guess is the way I think about it. Kind of a friend who comes along on their journeys, right? Tell us about that character, and then And then we should hear a little bit about the story, what actually happens and what sets them
Sure.
off on the quest.
So the third is Maki Rem, and he's a rough. He's the lieutenant of a small criminal gang that that Rae gets involved with, and he sees the Kelthannis family as kind of a curiosity because they obviously don't belong in this small town, and he's a very brutal person. He's the muscle of this gang. He's a lieutenant, but he's also in some ways the most caring person of all of them, because he sees himself as, he sees these two kids essentially as being kind of idiots, and in need of protecting in a physical and violent way that neither of them is really capable of outside of them. They're the three of them are really the three primary aspects of the body.
Oh, interesting.
Maki's the body, the muscle, the physical. La is the mind, and Rae is the spirit. And that trinity, that grouping, triumvirate, really sort of unwinds in the whole. That's like the theme behind the entire world, is the interaction between those three things. And so that's why Maki is there. I needed somebody who was the physical force, and again, the way that they solve problems is different. Maki's a puncher, as opposed to Rae will try to charm or magic his way out of things, and the more practical Lalette is trying to find ways to get around in a reasonable manner. So yeah, that's the three parts.
Yeah, very, very cool. So what's the quest? What happens? I mean, look, in a sense, you've already told us the family gets disrupted, right? But they've reached a kind of a stasis where the children are both kind of young adults and they're doing chores and going to inherit the farm here in Stormwall. What happens to move them beyond that?
I mean, I don't know how much I want to spoil, but the basic idea, the inciting incident, is that Rae tries to bind a storm elemental to his soul, and he succeeds, except he doesn't bind a storm elemental, he binds a wraith, and not just a wraith, but the wraith of a murdered mage. The mage was also a stormbinder, which is why he's confused at first. He thinks he's bound the storm elemental, and what he's actually done is bound the remnant of the storm elemental that was bound by this dead mage. And that causes a lot of trouble because the people who are responsible for the death of this mage are responsible for a lot of other stuff too. And so they begin to pursue Rae to silence him. And it gets into the cosmology again, but this wraith was being hidden for very specific reasons from the larger world. And now that Rae has bound it, they need to make sure that the knowledge of that dead man is not disseminated into the world. And so they begin to pursue it. They have to flee their hometown. They meet friends along the way. They meet allies. They make enemies. And Rae sort of has to figure out who the wraith is and why he was being murdered and why he's being pursued. It very much is a figure things out as you go along kind of thing. With a world as complicated and layered as Wraithbound is, you really kind of have to peel that onion slowly and kind of from the inside, right? So you're doing reveals as you go along, and you have to do it in a layered manner so that the reader isn't overwhelmed, but also is learning things as they go along and learning things in an interesting way so that they keep reading. My goal, like a lot of fantasy, action exposition, action exposition. I am a exposition as the action goes along kind of guy. I want to dole out information as things go on. So it's a pacey book. It's a kind of a plot driven book. But the world kind of unfolds as you go along, and you discover things as you go. So hopefully readers will be like, oh, that thing that I didn't think was important suddenly is, kind of reveal.
Yeah, it's a book that rewards paying attention to it as you read. And we see him struggling. Yeah, this confusion over, is he a stormbinder or not? Oh, he is wraithbound. He is bound to wraith to himself. He's a wraithbinder.
Yeah.
But we see other binders who work with life. We see angels and demons before we're done, in a sort of a hard magic Sandersonian kind of way. The magic system itself and insights into the cosmology play into some of the climactic scenes. The family mystery is relevant. It's not just backstory, right? It's not an accident that this is who was having the adventure. So it's got a very good. Sorry, I should be interviewing you, but my comment, right, having read it, that it's got a very satisfying feel to the way the whole thing unfolds. And it's getting great reviews, by the way. Congratulations.
Yeah, I'm very happy with the reviews. I'm very happy with the way it's been received so far. It only came out yesterday, and so
right.
A lot of people who were anticipating it haven't finished it yet.
Still in the book right now. Yeah,
they're in process. So I'm very curious to see how certain people react to it. But like it's a book where nothing is in that book by accident. Like, even if there are things that seem coincidental or circumstantial, it's all very intentional. Going back to, the creation of Fulcrum and sort of the history behind this world, it's all sort of knitted together. So, it's a book that was a lot of fun to write, and a world that was a lot of fun to create, I'm very satisfied with the book myself. But that's sort of a rare thing for me. I usually get to the end of a book and I'm like, almost got there. But yeah, this time I'm really very happy with the way things have come out. So
that's fantastic. So are we. Is there anything else that we should have talked about that we haven't? Is there anything else you particularly want to share about your setting or your story or characters?
The only other character that's really super significant is Estiv Cohn, who is kind of the Obi-Wan Kenobi figure here. He's the mentor, because there's a certain amount of Rae has to learn how to be a spirit binder that has to go on. And so I've always found that mentor character is a critical part of this kind of story, but is always sort of the same. And I really wanted to do something significantly different with that. So I think that I've done that with Estiv. He's a lot of fun, but he's also he's a very light character. He's kind of a goof, not really a clown, but he's very sir, I do not walk if I don't have to walk, kind of guy. And they're going on a walking journey, which is sort of the joke. He's always inconvenienced, always mildly miserable, and yet still drags himself through with these bloody children. So he's a fun guy. Yeah.
So okay, I'm going to ask questions here. You can choose to pass.
All right.
Okay. Are there matter binders? Is there an antimatter?
Yes. I have mentioned that there are 3 parts to the party. There's spirit, there is body, and there's mind. There are 3 parts to the magic system as well, and all we've seen so far is spirit binding. So there's what I call blood forging, which is another form, and then there's mind forging, which I haven't got a good name for yet, but that is all part of it. there's what you could call matter binding that's already in the book. I call it bond writing, or bond writing, because you can bind these spirits to physical things as well. That's done in the book. There's a group of people who have death-locked swords, which are, or spears, which are spears where the spearhead has been, the realm of death has been bound into it, and it makes them particularly dangerous. And that's one of the things that I try to do with a magic system, is make it particularly, it's not just the mages who have power. Like one of the reasons that there are muskets is because you can bind the realms of spirit into the musket balls, and so you can fire a shot that has been bound into the spirit of earth, which after it's fired, it brings the realm of earth into the shot and makes it really heavy. And so when it hits with an enormous amount of force. Or you bind it to fire and it blows up, that kind of thing. So that's kind of matter binding, but it's not, as you're like, as you're not binding to rock, or you kind of, that's what the elemental binding is. You're binding into stone. You can bind your body into stone and become hard, or something like that. So yes and no, I guess, is the answer.
Yeah. Okay, interesting. So that implies we might get some sequels.
I jokingly say I've got 20 books in my mind, but it's not a joke. Like, I've got there are things that are in this book that imply things about the cosmology that let you know that there's more here than just the ordered world. There's more than just fulcrum and its bounds. One of the cool things about fulcrum that I didn't really explain, fulcrum, the city, is built into what's called a world tree, which is when the material plane, when the realm of life found its way to the material plane. Like, when the material plane was created, there was no life. And the way that things began to live in the material plane was the Fae became aware of the material plane and decided they were going to go to it. And so they built these giant arcs, right? And traveled through the aether, or however you want to think of it, into the material plane. And when they reached the material plane, those arcs became giant trees. And so each of those trees was the origin point for life in the world. And fulcrum is just one of them. But that is kind of implied in the book, but not explicitly said. And one of the things that I don't know if it's actually in Wraithbound or not, but the tree that fulcrum is built on has died, and so is no longer growing, no longer a source of life magic. And Estiv is a life binder and has sort of dedicated his life to trying to regrow one of the world trees. So there's obviously a lot of other mythologies in there, but yeah.
Well, and again, this is a very old and resonant idea that the tree at the center of the world, which is the cosmic axis, right, binds multiple levels of existence together. Whether this is an idea that's been Yggdrasil in Norse mythology, but even like the temple menorah was seen by some writers to have cosmological significance that way. This is a very resonant.
Yeah, I'm not subtle in the fact that I draw from a lot of mythologies. We mentioned earlier the Hallowed War series. That the three influences for the Hallowed War series were the integration of paganism into medieval Christianity, the particular way that Mesoamericans approach the idea of good and evil balance, and Shintoism. So, and then I threw them together and made a nightly adventure out of it. So I always draw from kind of deep mythology when I'm doing my cosmology. I'm not I'm not working from, first materials. I'm making stuff up as I go along, but I always want to kind of draw in from my fairly extensive reading in mythology. That's my influence. So.
Sure. Well, fantastic. Well, what are you working on now? Are you working on a sequel to this? Are you working on something else? What's your projects these days?
I am writing the third Night Watch book, which is currently titled The Eccentrics, and it's kind of there's a steampunk team. That's kind of the pitch. I have a contract for a game company that I'm trying to finish that was due a while ago, and I'm outlining the second Wraithbound book, and then I've also got other stuff in the Wraithbound cosmology that I've written like 3 novellas for that might become chapters. I don't know, but that series is called. It's sometimes called Bladecaster. The name of the novel is The Language of Swords, and it has to do with sort of the deep history of the world of Wraithbound. So,
do you have a working title for the Wraithbound sequel yet?
No, maybe Wraithblade, maybe Wraithborn. The third book is Wraithbreaker, but I don't have the second title in my brain yet. I've been calling it Wraithborn, but the problem is there's this other book called Mistborn that you might have heard of.
No, I don't know one.
No, I know that guy is.
The Hack, probably.
Yeah. So I want to avoid like the obvious, I don't want them to make a mistake. I want people to know that they're reading something else. I
don't know if someone mistakenly bought your book.
Yeah, it's okay.
That doesn't hurt you too bad. You don't want the mistake to go the other way.
Yeah, that's unlikely to occur. I meant to buy this Tim Akers book, and this Sanderson guy got in the way. I don't know what's happening.
Could happen. All right. Well, hey, once again, the book is Wraithbound, out now from Baen Books in trade paper and in ebook. Hey, Tim Akers, thanks very much for taking the time to talk to us.
Thank you.
And now we bring you Timothy Zahn's Cobra. Earth's only hope was the Cobras. The colony worlds Adirondack and Silvern fell to the Troft forces almost without a struggle. Outnumbered and on the defensive, Earth made a desperate decision. It would attack the aliens not from space, but on the ground, with forces the Trofts did not even suspect. Thus were created the Cobras, a guerrilla force whose weapons were surgically implanted, invisible to the unsuspecting eye, yet undeniably deadly. But power brings temptation, and not all the Cobras could be trusted to fight for Earth alone. Johnny Moreau would learn the uses and abuses of his special abilities and what it truly meant to be a Cobra.
Johnny exhaled slowly. Another minor victory. And as emotionally unsatisfying as all such political wins seemed to be. Perhaps he thought it was because no opponent was ever fully vanquished in this form of combat. They always got back up out of the dust, a little smarter, and often a little madder each time. And Johnny would now be spending the next 3 months heading straight for Rae's political domain, while Rae himself had those same months to plan whatever revenge he chose. So much for victory. Grimacing, Johnny punched again for Almo Pyre. His order halting the ship's servicing would have to be rescinded. There was a great deal of work involved in turning over his duties on such short notice, and in the end Johnny wound up with far less time than he'd wanted to tell his family goodbye. It added one more shade of pain to the already Pyrrhic victory, especially as he had no intention of letting Rae know how he felt. The worst part, of course, was that there was very little aboard ship to occupy his thoughts. On the original trip to Aventine a quarter-century earlier, there had been fellow colonists to meet, as well as mag cards of information compiled by the survey teams to be studied. Here, even with the 14 business passengers Rae was bringing home, the ship carried only 36 people, none of whom Johnny was especially interested in getting to know. And if the ship carried any useful information on the impending war, no one was saying anything about it. So for the first couple of weeks, Johnny did little except sit alone in his cabin, reread the colony's data he'd brought to show the Central Committee, and brood. Until one morning he awoke with an unexpected, almost preternatural alertness. It took him several minutes to figure out on a conscious level what his subconscious had already realized. During ship's night they had passed from no man's space into the troughed corridor. The old pattern of being in hostile territory evoked long-buried Cobra training, and as the politician yielded to the warrior, Johnny unexpectedly found his helpless feelings giving way to new determination. For the time being at least, the political situation had become a potentially military one, and military situations were almost never completely hopeless. He began in the accepted military way, learning the territory. For hours at a time he toured the Mensana, getting to know everything about it and compiling long mental lists of strengths, weaknesses, quirks, and possibilities. He learned the names and faces of each of the 14 crewers and 6 Marines, evaluating as best he could how they would react in a crisis. Doing the same with the passengers actually proved a bit easier. With the same excess of free time he himself had, they were eager to spend time with him, playing games or just talking. More than once Johnny wished he'd brought Callie Halloran along. But even without the other's knack at informal psychoanalysis, he was soon able to divide the passengers into the old float/freeze categories, those who could probably deal with and adapt to a crisis, and those who couldn't. Heading the former were 2 executive field reps Johnny soon learned to consider friends as well as potential allies. Drew Koraheim, a pharmaceutical company executive whose face and dry humor reminded him vaguely of Ilona Linder, and Rando Harmon, whose interests lay in rare metals, and occasionally Drew Koraheim. For a while Johnny wondered if Drew had latched onto him to use as a partial shield against Harmon's advances, but as it became clear that those advances were entirely non-serious, he realized the whole thing was an elaborate game designed to give the participants something to concentrate on besides the mental picture of silent troughed warships. And when his survey was complete, it was back to waiting. He played chess with Drew and Harmon, kept abreast of the ship's progress, and, alone late at night, tried to come up with some way to keep the war from happening, or at least to keep it from happening to Aventine, and wondered if and when the troughs would move against the Mensana. 25 light-years from Dominion space, they finally did.
That was another installment in Timothy Zahn's Cobra, and that's it for the podcast. Thanks as always to Audible.com and podcast theme composer Ruth Judkowitz. Praise, thanks, and gratitude to Tim Akers, and good night, Tony Daniel, wherever you are. This is David Afsharirad coming to you from a soundproof bunker somewhere deep in the heart of Texas. Join us here next week at the hammering heart of science fiction and fantasy, and keep reaching for the stars.